Hello everyone, this is Module 5, Assignment 2. So we are continuing where we left off Module 5, Assignment 1. And in this assignment, we're basically going to be creating multiple lambda functions, so we can talk to the database. We need to create items, we need to update items, we need to delete items, and so on. And I'm going to be using this guide to follow step by step with it. And this assignment guide does tell us that we are provided all the code that we need to create our lambda function. So we're going to start with the very first lambda function, which is table scan. So I need to create a lambda function by that name, and then we need to deploy it, and then we need to create a test event for it to see if it works or not. Okay, so create a table scan and a test event called question without filter. Okay, so let's go back to AWS. Now from here, I'm just going to look for my lambda. And I'm going to right click so I could open up in a new tab. So I still have access to my DB. Close this, and now I have access to lambda. So I'm going to create a new function, call it table scan, and keep it Node.js. Now the instruction doesn't have this, but the way to do it is in permissions, because if I try to create a function now, I'm going to get an error there that I don't have permission, which is correct. And the reason why is because under permissions, I need to expand the change default execution role. And I'm not going to create a new role. I'm going to use an existing role that came part with this lab environment. I'm going to click on use an existing role. And then when you click on the pull down arrow, you get lab role. We don't need to use RoboMaker for students. That's for something else, not for us. We're going to be using lab role for the entire class. So click on lab role, and then come down here, and then click on create function. And now it will work. Okay, so now I've created a function called table scan. Now, okay, out of this, we get two tabs here. The index.js, that's the default page where you have the Node.js code. And then up here we have the test tab. And according to the instructions, we need to create a new event, a new test event. And we're going to call it, again, I'll go back to my study guide, question without filter. Okay, and let me basically copy this as well. Again, everything is provided for us. We just have to make it work. So say question without filter. And then down here, that's the JSON for our testing. I'm going to erase all that and just paste what I just copied a moment ago. All right, and then go up here again. If you do test, it's going to run the test right away without saving it. So I like to save it first. Okay, now it's saved, and then I'm going to run my test by clicking here. If everything goes fine, I get the green execution result is succeeded. If you expand it, you get to see the details, and you always want to see status code of 200. That's something good. But if you go back to the code tab as well, you're going to see the same result because one tab has the code, the other tab has the execution results. All right, so far we're good. Let's go back to our instructions, see what else we need to do. Okay, so now it says here that we have to add permissions. Now the first one ran fine. Let's go back here again. So this one ran fine without adding any permissions, which is fine, which is good. But we still do need to add more permissions in order for us to proceed to the next steps. So what we need to do here is, again, this instruction needs to be updated because it says click the role name starting with table scan role. Well, we're not using table scan role, we're using lab role. So basically I need to go back here, and then in my code, in my tabs, I need to click on configuration, and under execution role, here is my role name because that's what I assigned when I created this lambda function. I'm going to click on it. It's going to open up a new window. So this brings me to the lab role, and as you can see here, there are 7 policies attached to this role, and these are not the ones I need to use for this exercise. So I need to create a new policy and attach it to this role. So I'm going to click on add permissions and then attach policies. And since my policy is not one of these policies that already exist, I have to create a new policy. So I'm going to click on create policy. And the policy that I want to use has to do with the DynamoDB service because I want to have the lambda function talk to my DynamoDB. So for the service, choose a service. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to type DynamoDB, and there it pops up. I'm going to click on it. Now I need to give read and write permissions. So I'm going to click on the, if I click on the read, it's going to give me everything under read, and you don't want that. So at least not for this exercise. So I'm going to expand the read, and down here you get to see so many different specific permissions. I want to give it the get item, the query, and scan. Okay, so that's what you need to check for under the read. And again, you could find all that in the here in the assignment guide. Okay, and that's for read. Now for write, you need to expand that also, and I need to do update item, delete item, and put item. Okay, so when you're writing, delete is a write function, put is also a write function, and update is a write function. Okay, and then I need to click on this orange link. I'm going to click on that and wait a few seconds, and then I need to add a resource, an ARN resource, which is Amazon resource name. Click on that for my resources. The region, I'm US East 1, and then for the table name, I'm going to give it question. That's my table name that I need to access, and then click on add. Alright, so once I added that resource, I need to go to the JSON view, not the visual editor. So I click on JSON, and from here it basically tells me that this policy is going to allow to do all these things, which this is what I requested: put item, delete item, get item, scan, query, update. And for which resource? Well, for the question table. Now I want more than the question table. I also want to have permissions to the answer table. So to modify this JSON, basically this resource right now is just, this is the key name, this is the value. Well, I want this key name to have two values, not just one. So I'm going to change this to a list or an array. Nope, sorry. There we go. And then I'm going to separate it by, well, actually it's going to be the same exact, almost the same exact resource, but I'm just going to modify the ending. So to make it more than one item, do a comma, hit enter, paste it again, and then close your array, close the array. And then instead of being question, this is going to be answer. Okay, so I'm giving all these permissions to both the question table and the answer table. Okay, now just make sure that when you modify this this policy, that you turn it into a list or an array, and make sure that you put a comma here, because this array now has 1 and 2 items. Okay, and then do next, review, and the name of the policy, I know it's set to give it a rather long name. Where is that long name? There we go. So this is the policy name. Just going to copy it from here, and I'm going to paste it here. You can give a description, it's optional. I'm going to skip it, and then I'm just going to create the policy. Alright, so I get the green banner, the policy has been created. Now, once the policy has been created, I need to attach it to the lab role. I can technically do it from here, but I'd rather go back to my Lambda, and then in my lab role, I'm going to attach the policy that now has been created. So right now, I still have 7 policies attached to this lab role, and to add a to attach a policy that already exists, I'll go to the add permissions and add attach policies, and here is my policy. If you don't see the policy here, you can search for it by name. Okay, so I'm going to click on it and then attach policies. So now I have 8 attached policies instead of 7, because I just added this policy here. Okay, so that should take care of the permissions for us. The assignment instructions every few pages or steps is going to tell you to add permissions, add permissions, add permissions. We don't need to do that anymore, because we went the proper route of assigning the lab role, and within the lab role we attached a policy that will give us access to everything that we need. Okay. Alright, so we did this step. We attached this. Okay, now it wants us to test the test our code. Alright, so you now have granted your new Lambda permissions to perform 6 different actions, which is the get, the update, the put, and so on. And so I go back to the Lambda. There we go, Lambda. And I go to code. And then I test it. Now I get the 200 as before. Okay. And back to our assignment instructions. Let's see what's next. Okay, so now we need to create a new test event. Remember, we had one test event before, which is here in test. So this was the question without filter. Now the instruction is asking us to create another test event called question with filter, and it gave us the JSON. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight and copy that JSON. And I'm going to create a new test event called question with filter. So let's go back to here. I'm going to create a new event. So click on that and give it the name question with filter. Scroll down, modify this JSON, erase it, paste it. And then again, you can test it or you can save it first. I prefer to save it first. And then I'm going to do a test. And I get a success. So you can test it from this tab, or you can also go back to code. And then in the test here, now there's a there's always a pull down arrow, but if you click on it, you can choose which test event you want to use. Okay, so right now it's set with question with filter because that's the last time it ran with. And you could also test it with question without filter. So you don't have to always go back to your test tab and choose the which event name you want to test with. You can, quicker way is to go back to the code tab and then within test here choose which filter you want to use. So the good news is the questions with filter, when I run it, I get 200, which is good. And then if I test it also without the filter and test it, I also get 200. Okay, so far I think we're doing fine. Now we need to create a new test event called answer without filter, and again it gives us the JSON. So let's go ahead and do that. Copy, and it's called answer without filter. Go back to my test tab, create new event, answer without filter, and then change the JSON to what I just copied a moment ago, and then save it and then test it. And again I get the green succeeded. That's good. Let's see what else does it want it to do. Alright, so we did create our single lambda, which is the table scan, and we were able to run some tests on it using filter and unfiltered results. Okay, now next thing is to do the single record fetch. So you will build a single lambda to work with both the question and answer tables again. So create a lambda named get single record. So let's do that. Let's go back to our lambda. And I'm going to click on functions up here in the cookie crumb. Create a new function. Give it a name. And we said it was get single record. Alright. And again, permissions here, you have to give it the lab role. Now I don't have to here's lab role. I don't have to now give the extra permissions of attaching a policy because lab role already has a policy attached to it. So that's the good news. Now click on create function. Here's my function. Now it says that to get the code for the this lambda function, I need to copy the source code from the index.js file, which they did provide for us. So I need to go basically to my, here it is, get single record. I've already downloaded from the from our class, so I'm going to expand this. Here is index.js. Open it. I'm just going to highlight it and do a copy and go back to my lambda. Go back to my lambda here and okay that, and change the code for the default index.js. I'm going to erase all this and paste the new code. Now every time you modify code in a lambda function, don't forget to click on deploy, because even me, I sometimes don't notice that I made a change and I forget to hit deploy, and then when I test it I don't get the results that I'm expecting because I forgot to save it. So deploy saves and deploys it. So I'm going to click on deploy. Let's go back to our instructions. Let's see what else do we need to do. deploy, attach. So I don't need to attach because I already attached it. And I've done all this. Go to Lambda function and create a test event. Okay, so I need to create a test another test event called test get question. Now let me go ahead and copy this test get question. So in my new Lambda, I go to test, create a new event. I keep forgetting things. Test get question, and modify the event JSON to be this, what I just copied a moment ago. Save it. Okay, and then create another test event, this one for test get answer. Test get answer, so create new event. Get answer, so I did question, now it's answer. Okay. Alright, and let's save that. Now before I test anything, just to explain to you what this is all about. So we have two events that we just created, one called test get question. And if you can look at the test JSON, basically the resource we're using is questions, so we're going to the question table, and we are using a specific ID that we basically pass here. Now to get results back here, well, let's click on test and see if I do get anything back. Expand this, details, and I do get something back. Okay, now the reason why I also wanted to have the Dynamo table kind of open is if I go back to my table and I click on question, notice my ID here is 5EB something, and if I go to my get single record, see I'm getting it record back because in my in my test event I do pass the correct ID so that it finds a record. Okay, so that's why here currently my only question in my question table is this record here, and this ID, which I search by in my Lambda function, is the correct value, so that's why when I run it I do get something back. Okay, and if you go back to the code tab and let's see, what are we testing? Get question, yep. So if I run it, I do get something back. Now if I, just so you know how this thing works, so I go back to test and I modify, this ID value to something that does not exist. Let's make it let's make this C. Let's change it here as well, make this C. And I test it. I didn't save it, I just tested it. And I expand the results. The body is blank. See, now the body is blank because the Lambda function works, but the actual parameters that I sent, which is an incorrect ID for the question, does not exist. But if I change this back to B and change this ID also back to B, and then I test it, then I look at the results, I now see the data found again. So that's how you could work with these two tabs. And to test my answer as well, go back to DynamoDB, click on the answer table, and here's the ID for the question. Let's copy that just in case if it's not the same one. So this is 5B8, and go back to my Lambda function, and under test, let me go down to test get answer. Yep, it's the same. Let's test it again and expand. And there we go. So now we do have an answer because it is the backbone of Angular. Okay, so we created the Lambda, we created a test event, and we tested it and it comes back correct. The next thing in our assignment guide is need another type of single record fetch as well. This is okay, so this is only for questions, and this is going to handle something we're going to be using in the front end eventually in our Angular web application. So this Lambda is going to be called find one question, and let's see, replace the code, copy the code. Okay, so again we are provided the code, so find one question. Let's see, go back here, find one question. Here's my index. I'm going to select it all, copy, and back to our lambda, create a new one. I always forget names quickly. Find one question. Find one question. And again, for the permissions, make sure that you give it the lab role. There's no need to attach policies anymore because we did that already. Create the function. And for my code, I'm going to replace the default with this code. And then, does it want me to do a... Okay, there is no test here. Alright, so click on deploy, don't forget that. And now we have a new lambda function called find one question. Alright, more lambdas to come still. Now we need to create lambda for upserting a question and upserting a answer, as well as deleting questions and answers. So the word upsert basically is a mix of update and insert. If you try to add an item and it doesn't exist already based on the ID, then it will insert it. But if the ID or the item already exists, then it's going to update it. That's what upsert does. Okay. Now, what's unique about the upsert of records is we're going to be using code that's not just an index file like we saw in the index.js, but it's going to be an index as well as modules. With nodes, with Node.js, you could have dependencies and modules. So we're not going to upload a file, we're going to upload a zip file, and the zip file is going to have the index.js, and it's also going to have the folder that has all the dependencies that's needed for our code. So I'm going to create a new lambda called upsert question, and then I'm going to upload a zip file for the code. So go back to my lambda functions, create a new function, upsert question, and again, permissions has to be the lab role existing. Here we go. Create the function, and when I come to the code part, I'm not gonna erase this and then copy and paste. I'm going to go up here in the upload from. I'm going to choose a zip file. Then I'm going to navigate, click on upload so I can navigate to my upsert question. Basically, I used to be here. And let me just minimize this. So here's upsert question. Make sure that when you're working with the upsert question lambda, that you upload the correct upsert question code, because I made a mistake when I was doing this the first time around. And I uploaded the upsert answer into the upsert question, and I just couldn't understand what was wrong with my code. So don't upload any of these files, but upload the zip file. Okay, make sure that you click on that you upload the upsert question.zip. So here we go, and then save. What that's going to do is it's going to upload everything, including the JSON index, the module folder, and the index file. So we have everything here. All right, and did all that. Okay, did all that. Okay, so now we need to create a test event, and we need to call it test post, and we are going to use this JSON. So click on the test tab, new event, test post, modify the JSON. Okay, and then click on save. Alright, so it says to test your upsert question with the new test post event, we need to... okay. Alright, so what this lambda is going to do is it's going to add a new record or new question into the question table. Now if we go back to our DynamoDB, we click on question, and let's refresh just in case. I only have one record so far. Items returned, just one. Okay. Now when I go ahead and run this test, again, either it's going to update an existing record or it's going to insert a new record. Okay. So if I click on test, it runs, and I get that it ran successfully. And if I go back to my DynamoDB now and I refresh this page, now I have two records returned, and here is the new record that just got created for us. Okay, so this is another proof that it works fine, and this is the new ID. I think I'm gonna copy because I'm going to need it. So this code ran fine, and it inserted a new item in my question table. So that's how Lambda can talk to DynamoDB table. Alright, so we did that part correctly. We do need the ID eventually when we do the insert of the question. It says here we're not going to test updates. We're going to do that in module 6, so that's going to be next week. I need to create a new Lambda now, very similar to what I did. So this one's going to be for update upsert answer. And for my test event, I need to create another one. This one is the default code that comes with this assignment is going to throw an error. And that's why I added this instruction here to uncomment a couple of lines. Okay, now, we will be using this code later, but for now, to get it to work, we have to comment it out. So let's create a new Lambda function called upsert answer. And we're going to use the upsert answer.zip file just like we did with the upsert question. But this one is for answer. So go to functions again. Let's create a new function. Call it upsert answer. And again, give the correct lab role. Here we go. Create function. And for my code, I'm going to upload from. It's a zip file. Click on upload. Go up one step. Here's my upsert answer this time. Make sure you're picking the right code. And I'm going to do save. Okay. And here's this. Now, what I want you to do here is in this index.js, this line, no, sorry, not this line. This line, the origin, needs to be commented out. So you do //. You get an error here. Yes, that's correct. So we have to comment that line out as well. There we go. All right. Now, since I made changes, you always have to click on deploy, because if you don't, it's not going to save it and it's going to error out. Now, need to create a test event for it. And this is the JSON. Okay, so this is going to either update the answer item or it's going to insert a new answer item. Go to test, create a new event. What did it say that's going to be called? Test post as well. It's the same name, the same event name that we used also for the question, but again, this is a different Lambda, so we could use the same test name. All right, now the key point here is that, remember, when we are working with questions and answers, an answer belongs to a question. So this ID here is the ID of the question. So that's how now we start tying tables together. So this question ID has to exist in our Dynamo question table. So the BD98, does that exist? This does not exist. So if I run this, that's not going to do anything for me. So what I need to do is I need to modify. So this is the question table. I'm going to copy either one of these. Okay, so this is my super. So let's copy this and go back to here. And for my test, I'm going to update the ID for the question to be that. All right, and this is my super important answer. So we had a question before that was, this is my super. Well, let's expand this. Well, if I click on that, so this question is, this is my super important question, and for my answer for this question, I'm gonna make it, this is my super important answer. So this is the answer in the answer table that's going to be tied to this question, AF328, which is this question here. All right, again, that's how the relationship starts to happen. Okay, so go here and I test it. Everything works fine. And if I go back here and I go to items and question and click on answer, and let's refresh it in case you don't see it. There we go. So now we have two questions, and this is the second one I just added now, and it got a new ID. This is the ID for the question table, the answer table, I'm sorry, and then the question ID, this is the same ID that's in my question table. All right, so far things are working fine. Okay, so I did all that, All right, so now we come down to the deleting records. So just like when we were able to add, well, actually, let me give you another example I'm going to add another, go back to my Lambda function, the Upsert question, and I'm going to add a new question by running a test for it, and I'm going to modify this. There's a movie that I watched when I was a little kid called War Games, and it's basically a computer game, a computer movie, basically, back in the 80s. So there's a character called Professor Falcon, and the computer talks to Professor Falcon and trying to think if, hey, do we need to wage World War III or not? It's a nice movie if you're into computer stuff as a kid. So I'm going to say the question is, what would you like to do, Professor Falcon? Okay. And I'm going to give it Falcon question. All right, so this is my question that I'm going to be adding into my question table. Okay, now I'm going to be running the Upsert Lambda. So if the question is already there, it's going to update it, but if it's not there, it's going to insert it. So I'm going to run this, test it, and go back to my DynamoDB. I'm going to click on tables, click on question, and explore table items, and I only see 2, but if I refresh, I see 3. So now I added, here it is, here's my question Falcon, and here's my, well, let's expand this a bit. Yeah, okay, let's click on this whole thing. Alright, so what would you like to do, Professor Falcon? Okay. So that's my question. Now I need to add an answer to this question. So I'll go back to here, and let's click on functions, Upsert answer. So when I click on test and come to here, now I just need to make sure that the question ID that I need to give the answer to has the correct question ID as well. And also I need to change this answer to be, and the quote from the movie is, "Strange game, the only winning move is not to play. How about a nice game of chess?" And so that's going to be my answer for this question. But again, I have to tie the correct answer to the correct question. So if I go back to my question table, this is the question I want to answer. I'm just going to copy this, go back here, and update this. Yep. And then I'm going to save this, test it, and it works. So I go back to my DynamoDB, go to tables and answer, and explore table items, and I only have 2. And then if I refresh, and now I have 3, and here's my third question that I just added. Okay, so again, this answer, sorry, it's an answer, not a question. So this answer has a unique ID, but it also has a question ID that gets tied to a question in the question table. All right, so now we're able to insert a question, we're able to insert an answer, and the update we're going to be doing in week 6. So now we need to tackle deleting a question and answer. So let's go back to our assignment guide, and the last step is we have to delete records. Okay, so we're going to create a lambda called the delete record, and we're going to get the code also from the index.js that we have prepared for us. So let's do that. Go back to my lambda, functions, create a new function, call it delete. Notice it's delete record, it's not delete answer or delete question, because we're going to do both using the same lambda. Give it the same existing role, which has the policies attached to it already. Create function, and then while it does that, let's go to my files and folders, delete record, open the index, copy, go back to this, okay, go to the index.js tab, delete existing code, paste new code, deploy so you can save it, and then what else does it want us to do? Okay, we attached that already. Alright, so now it's telling you that what the test we're going to be running is actually going to be deleting actual records in our database, so just be careful. So we need to create a new test event called test delete question. Copy. So go to the test, create a new event, test delete question, modify the event JSON. Now, to be able to delete a question or to delete an answer, you have to make sure that the ID exists in your question or answer table. So this is using 5EB. Do we have a question that starts with 5EB? Question. Yeah, okay, so we do have this record. So if I run the test using this ID, then this record, which is the what is Angular question, should be deleted. So let's try that. I'm going to save it. Then I'm going to test it. So it runs. Get success. So if I go back here to my table, and now if I refresh, this one should disappear, this record here, okay, the 5EB. So let's refresh. There we go. There is no 5EB anymore. So deleting a question worked. All right. Then we go back here, and we need to create a new event. And let me just copy the JSON for the test event for the test delete answer. Copy. And create a new event. And test delete answer is the name. I'm going to modify the JSON. And again, make sure that this is going to delete an answer record. So make sure that this answer ID exists. So 5B86. Let's go back to Dynamo. Answer 5B86. So again, this record should be deleted once I test it. Okay? Because it's the backbone. So let's test that out. Let's save first, and then let's test. I got success. Go back to my Dynamo. Again, this is the one that should be deleted. Refresh. There we go. And I think that wraps up. Yep. So there we go. We were able to create a lot of lambdas functions that insert records for the questions table as well as the answer table, and we're able to delete records as well. And next week we're going to be tackling updates. If you have any questions about this assignment, please do let me know, and thank you so much for watching.